In 2025, I sold over $1 million worth of product on Amazon, and this is episode 12 of me scaling my business to $3 million in 2026. In this video, we're going to talk about how the third week of March went and show you guys all the numbers and stuff that I was doing. And before we hop in, if you guys are unaware, I have a free newsletter that I run. Link is in the description below. In here, I give tips every single week on Wednesdays about how to start or scale your online arbitrage business. So definitely feel free to check it out if you're looking for additional help. All right, and with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the third week of March and episode 12. All right, so let's go ahead and get into this week. All right, so covering the 15th to the 21st, you can see that we've purchased about 1,600 units. You guys can see that it's still 0.5. This is because we got unfortunate luck when it came to purchasing a product that went out of stock. So because of that, we needed a 2-pack and we were essentially buying like 1 unit per order. So now we aren't able to bundle the full item. So we're going to have a 0.5 in our units probably for the rest of the month, unless that item comes back in stock and we can restock it. ACOG, we did exactly $27, and then ASP is looking at about a $49 ASP almost. I updated the unique ASINs tab because before it was just basing it off of the week. I decided that I'm just going to show you guys the overall view of how many unique ASINs I bought this month. So far on the month, we are now at 218 unique ASINs bought. ROI, if we come down, is 25.35%. Feels pretty low this week considering that our margin's 14%. Not sure if the calculations got messed up there, but that is a little bit interesting to me. Next thing is the estimated sales are looking at about 81K with spend at around 45K. You guys can also see I updated the on hold to be on hold for the entire month so that you guys can get a full scope of what our spend is actually looking like. So you guys can see we have 30K of spend on hold just for the month alone. I believe for this week, our on hold amount was about 27K in spend. So pretty much all the hold spend from last week has been cleared up because all the products shipped. So most of that's coming from this past week. And then you guys can see we have an estimated of about 11K in profit. So not too bad. Definitely have some ambitious goals coming for the future that I'm excited to share with you guys. I don't know about in this episode, but potentially the next episode. And you're going to see that we're going to be aiming for a lot higher numbers moving forward. So overall, pretty excited. Not a bad week at all though. And then you guys can see when we come down to our net profit, we are currently at a 22K projected net profit, and we got one more week left on the month. So looking to do about 30K, which I would say is very accurate. And then net margin is right around 11.78%. So definitely not too bad. Would like to get those numbers up just a little bit though, because I feel like on a projections sheet, having your net margin be 11.7 is a bit low, but that's kind of what we're looking like. And then finally, before we hop into the Google Sheet, we can also see my disbursements from Seller Central this week is looking to be at about 130K, which is pretty good considering that this is covering essentially 3.5 weeks or so. And we'll have one more week left in March, a little bit more than a week, actually, probably around like 9 days to stack a little bit more bread to get that, hopefully to like 180K, because that would mean we're getting payouts of about 6K a day, which is pretty good. So cash flow is still holding really strong. I do have plans to probably get more money. I haven't dove too deep into that yet. So when I do, I'll definitely provide you guys an update of how I'm going about doing so. All right, and with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the Google Sheet so I can show you guys all of the results up until this point. All right, so in the Google Sheet here, if we come down here, you guys can see that right now we are at a total of 104K in spend on the month so far. And if I were to just highlight the entire on hold section, you can see that we have about 29, essentially $30,000 of on hold spend, most of which I do believe will go through because it's just all stuff that's awaiting shipment. So essentially we're already at our spend goal if everything goes through, because that will put us literally right at 135K in spend. And we still have like 10 days left in March. So that's really exciting stuff. I hope to get that, past like 160 or something like that. And then that's going to really set the stage for how Q2 is going to go. I'm still kind of blown away by the results that I've been able to produce for Q1. So motivation's at an all-time high, and especially just trying to push the needle as far as possible and see what's possible, because I had no ambition to be doing the numbers that I'm doing already, but it's great because that means we're really on track to do 3 million this year. No excuses. So just got to keep pushing that stuff further. You guys can see right now we're looking at about an average of a 30% ROI, margin of about 15.85, estimated sales of almost 200K. Again, spend is where it's at, and then estimated profits right now of 30K, which will increase once that 30K of on hold spend does actually get dropped into the regular side of the sheet here. And then we can see our total units bought is 426830. So again, those partial cancels, or not partial cancels, but those partial units that went out of stock, obviously affecting that point percentage there. And then ACOG is 2443 and ASP is $45.57. So I think personally what's lacking a little bit is profit margin. I feel like we're a little bit low for a gross profit number here. So if we take a look into our net projections, that's why we're looking at about 11.7 right now. I do think it'll be a little bit lower than that when it does net. So probably like 11%. But this is essentially all the stuff you guys have already been able to see from our Google Doc. So with all that out of the way, we'll go ahead and get into Seller Board, show you guys what we actually did this week and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so now here in Seller Board, you guys can see here are the stats. So we did about 70K in sales for this week of March. We had about 75 refunds come through and 11K in gross profit. So definitely not bad at about 1,500 units as well. So we check out more of the specifics here. You can see we're at a 5% refund rate, which is high. Need to get that lower, but could just be, you know, an off week or something like that. And then we still are holding a 16% gross margin, which is really good. So now that you guys can see the stats here on screen, I'm going to go ahead and compile the numbers to get our net profit and net margin. Okay, so for this week on prep and overhead, we spent about $3,000. So if we go ahead and reduce that from the $11,000 in profit that we have currently made on our gross number, you can see that net profit we did this week was at 82,586. So pretty good week of profitability right there. And then if we take that number and divide it by our sales, we'll go ahead and figure out what our net margin's looking like. Okay, and you guys can see here that we have ended off this week at about 11.8% net margin. So that's again an estimate, but pretty good numbers there. Definitely aligns with what we're seeing in the projected profits Google Sheet, and everything seems to be, you know, just slowly scaling up, which is great. So I'm going to go ahead and go over some of the stuff I was working on this week. And then I'm also going to go ahead and talk to you guys about just some future plans and stuff like that. So we'll go ahead and get into that part next. Okay, so you guys can see here some of the stuff that I was working on this week, two big things in particular. The first thing is going to be I hired a new purchase order buyer. So if you guys remember last week's episode, if you watched that, I was basically going through a long hiring process. We have finally made it out. After a ton of applications, I finally got a good candidate who actually fit everything we needed, from availability to who they are as a person. Can we vibe with them? Do we think they're going to be a good candidate based on their background, experience, expertise? We do hire everyone with no experience, but we like to see people who, you know, have college experience because it shows they can probably be somewhere on time, get work done. On top of that as well, we also like to look for people who just have a good attitude, right? Like these are all kind of intangibles you can't really train into somebody. So finally we found somebody. I went through over 150 applications. Okay, so I just did it in a Google form where essentially if they didn't put their first and last name, it was a simple test to see if people were following instructions. Over 60% of them did not put their first and last name. So this is why it's really important you guys know how to filter and like get rid of bad applicants when you're trying to hire a VA. It can be something as simple as saying your favorite color, filling out your name on the Google form correctly. Like there's so many ways to just cut out like 60% of the bad prospects. And then another 20 to 30% that did fill in their answers to the responses. I went through their profile on Online Jobs PH. A lot of them were older, like 35, 40, 45. I even have some people who were like 50. So there was a lot of older people in it. So most of those guys got weeded out as well. And then the rest, which came out to be about like 8 applicants, I think it was, didn't appear for their interview. A couple of them had no shows. And then the ones that we did take interviews with were just not a good fit. They were awkward, or personality wasn't really looking for what we were looking for, or their qualifications just simply weren't there. So again, goes to show you how important it is to have good filtering mechanisms when hiring, because there is always going to be a disproportionate amount that aren't going to work for you versus those that will. And it does take time to find quality. I think if I would have not found the guy that I did for this week, I would have been in my second week of basically searching for a prospect that would actually fit the role. So the guy low-key saved me. I also had a second call with another girl who I think would have been qualified, but not for this particular position. Definitely had a different type of energy to her and something that I haven't really seen from a virtual assistant. So she was a really cool candidate. I'm going to see if I can get her contact info and just keep in touch, because you never know when I need another position filled that she might be able to go and fill for me. And then the next thing is the new sourcers had just started their first day this week. So I'm having my sourcing manager review their leads and give feedback to free up my time. And for now, I plan to let them source independently on their own. Overall, the training process took about 7 days long. As you guys know, I like to do my training to where it's essentially a process of we do a one-on-one for about an hour, and then we give them a quiz to basically see if they understand the small concept that they were given. So that was about a 7-day long training process, and essentially just rinsed and repeated that framework all the way through. So now we're going to start seeing how some of their results are just from basic training. Really not expecting much. I don't expect to buy any of the leads they send me because I'm not putting any barriers up as to what they can and can't submit. Just really seeing if they have a grip on the whole process. And once they do, then we'll start being more critical come beginning of April. And I'm probably going to make a cut. So somebody is going to get cut somebody's going to stay. So whichever the better one out of the two that I've been split testing is better at following directions, is likely going to learn easier, and we think has more potential, we're going to keep that one, cut the other one. Okay, so that was everything that I worked on this past week. Obviously, the other mandatory stuff is spending money, staying consistent, right? All the regular stuff, but that was some of the outliers. And then some ideas I have coming for this week is start evaluating product sourcers results. So like I was just saying, at the end of this week, we're going to actually start diving into some of the sourcers findings, seeing what they're coming up with. I've been kind of just screening what Ram has been giving them feedback wise, just to see if there's anything I can add into there. But now the plan is going to be to have the new sourcers essentially send me a Loom video. They're going to send me and Ram, which if you don't know who Ram is, he is the sourcing manager. They're going to send us a Loom video, and we're going to critique the 45-minute Loom video that they're going to send us every single day. And we're essentially just going to try and pick through their process, give them advice, see who learns and adapts the advice. And then again, once we can get an idea of who's paying attention, who's following directions, who's taking feedback constructively, all these type of positive attributes, we're going to let that person stay, cut the other person, because there's clearly just going to be a better and easier way to grow with somebody else than the person who's not doing as well, not listening, not following directions, etc., etc. Okay, so then the next thing that I plan to do for this week is going to be mapping out our purchase order training schedule. So the buyer that we just hired, we're going to map out his training schedule. I actually have never put together an SOP before for somebody who's strictly just a buyer, because my original admin VA, who is now like the admin manager, her name is Jamie, essentially she was a product sourcer for me back when I didn't know how to train anybody on shit. So now I've transitioned her into an admin. Well, not now, I did that like way long ago, like when I first hired her and I realized that I didn't know anything about sourcing, so she's not going to know anything about sourcing. I transitioned her to an admin. She's been with me for almost like a year and a half at this point, so I never had to actually train her, just because like it was kind of like we adapted. I was a much smaller seller back then, so she had time to like really learn this stuff. But for this guy, we're obviously selling a lot more than I sold back in December of 2025 or January of 2025, or not December of 2025, but December of 2024 and January of 2025. I've grown a lot more since then, so I definitely got to make a roadmap, condense and consolidate each individual lesson when it comes to actually purchasing orders correctly. So I'm going to plan a week to 2 week long roadmap. I'm not entirely sure how long it's going to take this particular position to have competence. We do have some testing that we want to do just with like certain purchases for this person to tell if they're like actually getting the ropes. So we're going to have a bunch of tests laid out, but essentially I just got to map out the entire framework, and then I plan to have Jamie take all the calls, train the buyer, and then from there we can kind of gauge how he's learning, how he's doing. I think it'll be a pretty easy integration into our team as long as I can get a good framework, because I think this guy's a really good fit. All right, and with all that out of the way, that's pretty much going to wrap up this week. Not too much to talk about this particular week, because a lot of it was just expanding off of the hiring, training, and all that stuff from last week. So now we're going to start seeing how these new hires do, see how my frameworks and SOPs are applying to them, see how well they can learn this stuff, and hopefully get the ball rolling really well by the time April rolls around. By end of April, I want everybody to be able to do their job at least sub-adequately, so that we can actually start utilizing more human hours to scale the business. So that's going to be all for this episode. Again, if you guys have not subscribed to the newsletter below, definitely feel free to give it a subscription. And with all that out of the way, I will catch you guys in the next episode. So peace out.